Did you know that over 10,000 people are currently being held in detention facilities across Australia, and most citizens barely know these places even exist? Even more shocking, leaked documents and quiet construction contracts suggest that new centres are being built right now, tucked away from public attention. Why? That's the question nobody seems to have a clear answer for. Some believe it's just about immigration control, but others argue it's about something much bigger: political power, economic pressure, even future climate crises. The strangest part, government officials rarely talk openly about it, and mainstream media coverage is almost silent. It feels like there's a story here that someone doesn't want you to know. Imagine waking up one day to find that entire communities are being relocated, or that thousands of people are suddenly processed and deported without a single headline. Sounds dramatic, right? But what if I told you that the groundwork for this is already being laid? In this video, we'll uncover 10 possible reasons why Australia is secretly building deportation centres right now. And trust me, you'll want to hear them all. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss eye-opening stories like this one. Number 10. Future climate refugees. When people think about deportation centres, they usually picture short-term facilities meant for visa overstayers or illegal arrivals. But what if the real purpose is tied to something much larger, something that hasn't fully hit yet? That something is the looming crisis of climate refugees. Australia sits on the doorstep of the Pacific, a region filled with low-lying island nations like Tuvalu, Kiribati, and the Marshall Islands. Scientists warn that many of these islands could become unlivable within the next few decades due to rising sea levels, saltwater intrusion, and stronger storms. We're not talking about hundreds of people, but potentially hundreds of thousands suddenly searching for a safe place to live. Now imagine the pressure that would put on Australia. As one of the closest developed nations, it would likely become the first destination for desperate families fleeing homes swallowed by the sea. And while humanitarian aid sounds like the obvious solution, governments often plan differently behind closed doors. Instead of preparing for open borders, they might be preparing for containment and control. Deportation centres, then, could act as holding facilities, not just for today's migrants, but for tomorrow's climate-displaced populations. These centres would allow the government to process, screen, and possibly return individuals under international agreements rather than permanently resettle them. It's a grim thought, but one that matches the timeline of construction and the silence surrounding it. Rather than being reactive, Australia could be building infrastructure years in advance, quietly bracing for a wave of climate-driven migration that most people haven't even started thinking about. So, while the headlines talk about border security or illegal overstayers, the real story might be far more forward-looking: deportation centres as future climate refugee camps hidden in plain sight. Number 9. Public health emergency preparedness. If the past few years taught governments anything, it's that the world can change overnight. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed just how unprepared even wealthy nations were when faced with a sudden health emergency. Hospitals were overwhelmed, quarantine spaces were improvised in hotels, and borders shut down in chaos. For Australia, the memory of that crisis still lingers, and it may explain why new detention-like facilities are quietly being constructed. On the surface, they may be labelled as deportation centres, but look closer and you'll see how they could easily double as quarantine hubs or emergency containment zones. These facilities are usually built away from dense city centres, have controlled perimeters, and are designed for rapid isolation of large groups. That makes them surprisingly versatile in a public health crisis, where speed and separation can save lives. Beyond pandemics, think about natural disasters. Bushfires, floods, or cyclones, all of which Australia experiences regularly. In moments when thousands are displaced, such centres could quickly serve as emergency shelters, equipped to house and monitor people under strict conditions. Critics argue that building such facilities under the label of immigration control allows governments to avoid public debate. After all, if people were told outright that the state was preparing for mass disease outbreaks or climate catastrophes, panic might spread. By presenting them as deportation centres, authorities can justify their existence without sparking fear. This dual-purpose design is what makes the story so intriguing. They can detain, but they can also protect, depending on the situation. The same walls that separate migrants today could become the walls that isolate infected patients tomorrow. It's a form of hidden preparedness, a safety net cloaked in contribution bars. Overseer. In other words, what looks like a harsh immigration tool may secretly be Australia's insurance policy against the next global emergency. Number 8. National security risks. When most people hear about detention or deportation centres, they immediately think about overstayed visas or undocumented workers. But governments often frame such facilities in another way, as tools for national security. And for Australia, that argument is becoming more urgent. In a globalised world, not everyone crossing a border is just looking for work or a safer life. Intelligence agencies quietly warn about individuals with criminal backgrounds, organised crime links, or even extremist ties attempting to blend in with migration flows. While only a tiny fraction may pose real threats, that fraction is enough to justify strict measures in the eyes of policymakers. Detention centres, then, aren't just about housing people, they're about control and surveillance. Inside these walls, authorities can screen, investigate and assess whether someone poses a genuine risk before deciding on deportation or release. Unlike regular prisons, these centres are designed for flexibility. People can be held without criminal charges, monitored more closely and removed from the country far more quickly if needed. Australia's geography also makes it uniquely vulnerable. Its vast coastline and proximity to Southeast Asia create potential entry points that are difficult to police entirely. Smuggling operations, human trafficking networks, and even fears of foreign infiltration keep security officials on edge. By building new centres, the government gains infrastructure that allows it to react swiftly if sudden security concerns arise. Critics argue that this justification can be stretched too far, turning ordinary migrants into suspects under the banner of national security. But from a government perspective, it's about minimising risk before it escalates. Detention facilities become a kind of buffer zone, a place where uncertainty is contained till the state decides who stays and who goes. In this light, Australia's new deportation centres may be less about migration numbers and more about protecting borders from invisible threats. Number 7. International agreements. Sometimes what looks like a domestic decision is actually part of a much larger international deal. Australia's deportation centres may not just serve its own policies, they could be the result of agreements made quietly with powerful allies. Think about Australia's close partnerships with countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and regional neighbours in the Pacific. These relationships extend far beyond trade or defence. They often include cooperation on migration and border control. When one country struggles with migration pressure, others in the network may step in to share the burden, or in some cases, to shoulder it. This isn't without precedent. Australia has already entered controversial deals in the past, such as paying smaller nations like Nauru and Papua New Guinea to host offshore detention centres. These arrangements kept asylum seekers out of mainland Australia while still keeping them under its control. New facilities being built now may be part of the same playbook, but on a larger and more secretive scale. There's also the possibility of reciprocal agreements. For example, if the US agrees to accept some refugees processed in Australia, then Australia might commit to holding or deporting individuals on behalf of another ally. These kinds of behind-the-scenes negotiations rarely make headlines but can dramatically shape how and where detention infrastructure is built. For governments, these deals serve two purposes. They strengthen alliances and they help manage migration flows without the appearance of unilateral action. For the public, though, it often feels like decisions are being made in closed rooms, far from democratic debate. So when we see new deportation centres rising, they may not be a purely Australian project. Instead, they might be nodes in a wider international system, quietly fulfilling obligations made under the radar of public attention. Number 6. Strain on housing crisis. Australia is facing one of its worst housing crises in decades. Rents are skyrocketing, property prices remain out of reach for many young families, and waiting lists for public housing are longer than ever. Against this backdrop, public frustration is boiling over and migration has become an easy target. Many Australians now believe that new arrivals, whether temporary workers, students, or asylum seekers, are adding fuel to the fire. This perception, whether accurate or exaggerated, creates a political storm. Leaders feel pressure to do something visible about migration, even if the housing crisis is driven by broader issues like lack of supply, speculation, and urban planning failures. Deportation centres then become a symbolic solution. They allow governments to show that they're managing migration numbers, offering a visual and tangible response to public anger. But beyond symbolism, there's a practical dimension too. With limited housing stock, authorities may see mass deportation facilities as a way to temporarily remove pressure from the system. Instead of allowing overstayers or rejected asylum seekers to remain in the community where they compete for scarce rentals, they can be kept in detention until their status is resolved. Critics argue this approach is both cruel and misleading. It doesn't actually build more houses or address affordability, it simply shifts blame onto vulnerable populations. Still, from a political perspective, deportation centres provide a way to reassure voters that action is being taken, even if the deeper structural problems remain untouched. In this light, the expansion of such facilities may not be about border control at all, but about managing domestic perception during a time of intense housing stress. They're not just holding spaces, they're political props in a much larger crisis that touches nearly every household in Australia. Number 5, economic control. Behind every debate about migration lies a quieter concern: the economy. Australia's job market, like many others, operates on a delicate balance. Too few workers and industries suffer. Too many, and wages can stagnate or even fall. Deportation centres may be part of how the government tries to maintain that balance by using detention as a tool of economic control. Consider this. Migrant labour plays a crucial role in sectors like agriculture, construction, and hospitality. These industries often rely on temporary workers who are vulnerable to exploitation because of their uncertain legal status. By threatening detention and deportation, authorities can indirectly regulate the labour supply, ensuring that employers can't simply flood the market with low-wage workers who undercut locals. At the same time, detention centres serve as a deterrent. For those who overstay their visas or attempt to work illegally, the risk of being detained becomes a powerful message: play by the rules or face removal. This allows the government to appear tough on migration while quietly shaping the workforce in a way that benefits the economy. There's also a financial angle. Detention and deportation are expensive, but governments sometimes frame them as long-term cost savers. By removing people who may rely on social services, compete for housing, or work outside tax systems, they argue that the state is ultimately protecting public resources. Whether or not that claim holds true, it resonates with voters who feel squeezed by rising living costs. Critics, however, point out that this approach treats human lives like economic variables, valued only for their labour and discarded when no longer convenient. Still, the reality is hard to ignore. Deportation centres give governments the ability to fine-tune the labour market, using fear and control as tools to influence who stays and who goes. Number 4. Border security concerns. Australia is famous for its strict border policies, and for good reason. It has one of the longest coastlines in the world, stretching over 25,000 kilometres. Policing every inch of that vast frontier is nearly impossible. While most arrivals are legal and processed through official ports, the fear of unauthorised sea crossings has never gone away. Deportation centres, in this context, become a crucial part of a broader border security strategy. In the past, boats carrying asylum seekers made headlines, sparking national debates about sovereignty and control. Offshore detention facilities in places like Manus Island and Nauru were created as deterrents, sending a clear message: if you try to come illegally, you won't make it to the mainland. The new wave of centres being built may simply be an updated version of that same philosophy, only this time constructed quietly and more strategically. These facilities act as buffer zones. Anyone intercepted at sea or caught entering unlawfully can be processed, contained, and swiftly deported without ever blending into the community. For the government, it's about speed and decisiveness, the ability to remove people before they can lodge lengthy appeals or gain public sympathy. Beyond asylum seekers, there's also a growing fear of smuggling networks and transnational crime using porous borders as entry points. Detention centres give authorities space to hold individuals suspected of being part of such operations while investigations take place. In an age where national security overlaps with migration, the line between illegal entry and security threat becomes increasingly blurred. Critics argue that this approach sacrifices compassion for control. Yet from the government's perspective, maintaining strong borders is about projecting sovereignty and strength. Deportation centres, therefore, are not just about migrants. They're part of a larger defensive shield, designed to keep Australia's borders as tightly guarded as possible. Number 3. International tensions. Australia doesn't exist in isolation. Its geography places it right in the middle of a region marked by shifting power dynamics and rising instability. From disputes in the South China Sea to political unrest in nearby Pacific nations, the ripple effects of international tensions often land squarely on Australia's shores. Deportation centres, in this context, may not just be about domestic migration, they could be a strategic response to growing uncertainty abroad. When conflicts erupt, borders collapse and people move. Refugees from war-torn areas, victims of persecution, or communities displaced by unrest often look for safety in neighbouring stable nations. For countries like Australia, this means sudden, unpredictable surges in asylum applications. Without proper infrastructure, such surges can overwhelm the system. Detention and deportation centres act as shock absorbers, giving the government space to manage these inflows without losing control. There's also the matter of diplomacy and leverage. By maintaining strict facilities, Australia signals to its neighbours, and even to rival powers, that it is serious about controlling its borders. This isn't just about migration, it's about projecting political strength. A country that can't manage its borders risks being seen as weak, and in geopolitics, weakness invites pressure. Tensions with nations like China, and even closer to home unrest in places like Papua New Guinea or the Solomon Islands, create scenarios where migration could be used as a bargaining chip or a tool of pressure. Deportation centres give Australia a way to respond quickly and decisively if large groups suddenly arrive due to external conflicts. In other words, these facilities aren't just cages for migrants, they are part of a geopolitical toolkit, a silent but powerful reminder that Australia is preparing not just for today's challenges, but for tomorrow's unpredictable international crises. Number 2, political pressure elections. Few issues ignite political debate in Australia as fiercely as immigration. It has become one of the most polarising topics during election campaigns, shaping how parties present themselves to voters. For politicians, migration policy isn't just about managing borders, it's about winning votes. Deportation centres, therefore, can be seen as powerful political tools, especially when election season approaches. When citizens are struggling with rising costs, job insecurity, or housing shortages, it's easy for leaders to point toward migration as a convenient explanation. By highlighting deportation centres and strict border control, governments can project an image of being tough and in control, appealing to voters who feel anxious about change. Even if the real root causes of economic or social problems lie elsewhere, migration becomes a rallying point. Historically, tough migration stances have given parties an edge in close contests. Just the announcement of new facilities or the promise of stronger enforcement can sway undecided voters. These centres serve as visible evidence, bricks, barbed wire, and guards, that politicians are taking action, even if the long-term effectiveness is questionable. There's also the matter of political rivalry. No party wants to appear soft on migration. If one side pushes for stronger enforcement, the other often follows suit to avoid being painted as weak. This competitive cycle fuels the expansion of deportation infrastructure, regardless of whether it's truly necessary. In the end, deportation centres may not just exist because of policy needs, but because they play well on the campaign trail. They are stage props in a larger political performance, carefully timed to reassure anxious voters and secure electoral wins. For governments, the optics of control can be just as valuable as the reality of it. Number 1, rising immigration pressures. Australia has long been a destination for people seeking opportunity, stability, and safety. With its strong economy, high standard of living, and reputation as a peaceful nation, it's no surprise that migration levels continue to climb. But in recent years, the numbers have surged faster than many expected, creating a sense of pressure on infrastructure, housing, and public services. This mounting strain is one of the clearest reasons why deportation centres are being quietly expanded. Every year, thousands of people overstay their visas, arrive without proper documentation, or find themselves caught in legal limbo. While the majority of migrants contribute positively to society, even a relatively small percentage of overstayers can overwhelm an already stretched immigration system. Deportation centres then act as a safety valve, giving authorities a way to manage these cases without allowing them to linger unresolved in the community. At the same time, there's the reality of perception. Many Australians feel that migration is accelerating faster than the country can adapt, especially in cities where infrastructure is under pressure. Governments, sensing this unease, often respond by showcasing strict enforcement. Building deportation centres provides a visible demonstration of control, reassuring the public that borders aren't wide open. But the issue goes deeper than politics. Australia's geography and economy make it a magnet for both skilled and unskilled migration, and as global instability rises, those pressures are only set to grow. Deportation facilities offer flexibility, allowing the government to scale up removals when numbers spike, rather than being caught off guard. In short, rising immigration isn't just a demographic shift, it's a driver of policy, politics, and public sentiment. Deportation centres become the physical response to an invisible pressure, spaces built not only for today's migrants, but for the inevitable influxes of tomorrow. So, what do these deportation centres really represent? On the surface, they look like immigration facilities, but when you peel back the layers, a more complex and unsettling picture emerges. They're tied to politics, economics, security, and even the future of climate refugees. Each reason we've explored reveals just how much more is at stake than most people realise. Maybe these centres are about protecting Australia's borders. Maybe they're about preparing for crises that haven't yet unfolded. Or maybe, just maybe, they're part of a story much bigger than any of us have been told. And that's the chilling part. We may not know the full truth until it's too late. Making videos like this takes an enormous amount of research, time, and effort. These aren't easy stories to uncover, but they're important ones. If you found this video thought-provoking, if it opened your eyes to possibilities you hadn't considered before, then I have one request. Please subscribe to this channel. Every subscription helps me continue creating content that asks hard questions, challenges the official narrative, and brings hidden truths into the light. It's not easy work, but with your support, it's possible. So hit that subscribe button, because together we can keep searching for answers to the questions most people are too afraid to ask.